Welcome to the second edition of On and Up Coaching's Book Club podcast. I'm Paul Gaskell and I am the owner of On and Up Coaching, and I am delighted today to be joined by Rosanna Ortega-Lopenza, Mike Sicaranza, Beth Moore, and Kim Mooney-Doyle. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. Those of you who were here for the first one, thank you for joining me again and going through this interesting learning experience. So today's book is Drive, and I always get the title of this wrong, but it's called The Surprising Thing About What Really Motivates Us. And we're just going to share a couple of slides just so we can center everybody about what this book is about and what it is trying to teach us. So, be helpful to get back to the beginning. The surprising truth about what really motivates us. Just a few words to say. The book was published in 2011. There've been over 2 million copies sold. It was consistently on the New York Times bestseller list for a while. Daniel Pink is actually a former speechwriter for Al Gore. And what he does is he draws together a series of research findings and real-world examples about the importance of intrinsic motivation. And whilst it seems, we'll check, it seems to me intuitive, the best way to motivate people is to give people lots of money and what he describes as the carrot and stick approach. But this book, I think, makes an incredibly strong case for a radically different approach of how to incentivize people. And just this is the last slide. I'll chime in, but Mike, your sense of what are the big ideas here that you feel people should know about?
Well, again, I think that it comes to, this is a tactic or this is a strategy or a culture, again, that can be used in all walks of life, whether you're in business, whether you're, interpersonal relationships, whether you're in the educational field. We all have roles and responsibilities, and we all have to learn and teach others how to move forward and how to get the best out of life. And a lot of the things that Daniel Pink talks about primarily are about how to help people kind of self-determine what their future really wants to look like. And it really, there's some different aspects to it. His three main topics are autonomy, mastery, and purpose, where when you give people those things or the ability to achieve those things, they tend to be happier, they tend to be more motivated, they tend to drive towards the common purpose, and results tend to be better, quite frankly. So.
Absolutely. There's probably some kind of examples that I want to pull out, but he talks at the very beginning about kind of consistently kind of research experiments about financially incentivizing people doing cognitive tasks doesn't lead particularly to better results. In fact, in a lot of cases, it can lead to worse results because of the way the incentivization happens. So therefore, looking kind of more inwards, he quotes quite extensively an Australian software company called Atlassian, who interestingly, I think, have just bought Trello. So clearly they're doing something right. So this is from 10 years ago, and they had what they called a FedEx day. And I'm blanking on why they called it a FedEx day, but it seemed like a really good idea. The essence of the day was people had the opportunity to go and kind of work on their own ideas around software. They could work on any project, and the only condition was they had to come back a day later and present the findings. And what the company found was that through this kind of free day, what they were allowed to do, what they were doing in that day actually contributed as much, if not more, to the overall success of the company. So that's I guess a really good example of kind of autonomy, mastery, and purpose coming.
Paul, the interesting thing is that the ticker symbol for Atlassian is TEAM, TEAM. So really? they even took it to the level was when they went public. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. So let's come back to them, but I think that there's kind of a lot in sort of how they illustrate how you bring these things together. I did want to touch quickly on Green Cargo as well, which are a Swedish public company who had not made a profit in their lifetime, I believe, until they implemented a different performance management system. And the essence of the performance management system was not the annual review of performance. They implemented a monthly review where basically the manager as coach tried to establish as much as possible were employees underwhelmed, were they overwhelmed, and the goal was to find work for people that was kind of at the right level, and they call this the sort of Goldilocks tasks or activities, so they were just right. And I think it's about 18 months in, they started turning a profit after implementing this quite radically different performance management system. And then finally, before we kind of get into a kind of more panel discussion, did want to mention that one of the underpinning kind of pieces of research here is, and Mike, you can correct me if I get this wrong, but I think it's Csikszentmihalyi. Did I get that right?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. Mikhail, to all of his friends, I'm sure, and he essentially identified this concept of flow, about where people find the most satisfying experiences, and they tend to be when they're kind of in something that has all these characteristics of purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And he is widely quoted in a lot of other books, but it's certainly central to the kind of the thought process in this one. So I'm going to stop sharing, and so I'll start again with Mike, because Mike has read the book more times than I have. Again, if you were tuned into last week's episode, so if I think about kind of, I'm interested as to when you read the book, and kind of what kind of impact it had on how you thought about intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, so I probably read it because I actually saw Daniel Pink speak after he wrote. I think it was it A Whole New Mind, which talks about right brain thinking versus left brain thinking. Another great book. And so I read it probably immediately as soon as it came out afterwards. And I've read it, like I said, a couple of times since then, and it radically changed, especially as a business owner, how I work with, how our organizational structures kind of been held, and how our compensation structures, quite frankly, have changed over time. I mean, I've always been part of coaching programs, and back in the day, they were like, you need a results-based pay. We're going to have a compensation of salary plus bonus plus this plus that, and we still have those things, but the emphasis is not like if you do these 5 things and these 5 extra things, you're going to get X amount of dollars. It's focused more about, okay, let's pay people really what they're worth, and well, we have a bonus structure based upon our team as a group. We all, rising tide lifts all boats together, and also going down, but then focusing on the things that allow people to grow and develop. So, unlimited pay time off. The ability to take some time out of your day to learn things that you might not have time to learn. So carving out time for professional development. The ability to, try new challenges underneath our umbrella. So, we talked a lot about culture last time with 7 Habits. I think this is an extenuation of culture and how you create a culture to allow people to continue to grow. So I've done a lot of it mostly in my in my business career, in how I interact with people. Like, we've gotten rid of like the annual reviews, right? And we do, where we've gone more to coaching. We've taken a lot of those different things and incorporated. Where I've kind of failed is on using it at home, and trying to motivate teenagers and preteens throughout my, to find that self-motivation. So I'm still working on that. But I mean, from a work perspective, I've used a lot of what is in Drive quite a bit.
Awesome. So clearly, based on last week, where they had the 7 habits of highly effective people, 7 habits of highly effective teams, what we really need here is the surprising thing about what motivates teenagers.
That's exactly right.
Might help us.
Exactly right.
Thank you. So Rosanna, based on what you've seen, are you persuaded by the case that intrinsic motivation is uh, as important as Daniel Pink lays out in the book?
Yeah, I haven't read the book. I'm one of the the panelists that haven't read the book,
Mhm.
but I want to now. And immediately, the more information that I got from this book, Drive, and the surprising truths about what motivates us is, first of all, made me thought about social economics, who really gets to think um, and in order to get to the next level in your professional career. You know, many of the people around the world wants that motivation, which is the paycheck. You know, with a paycheck, you really get to do a lot of things for your family. You get to be stable somehow, you know. But what really makes the difference from those who have succeeded and make meaning into their careers and their work, and in general sense, is those who thrive, like the same as the book says, those who have the autonomy, those that are thinking about the mastery, and those that have purpose. So that to me was fascinating. So I'm really eager to read the book, and I'm also trying to adjust what can I learn, since I am a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids, trying to adjust it. You know, it's not so much because this book is really catered to those working in the industry, you know, promoting their careers, but also, you know, as I see it, what can I do to motivate my kids, the desire to learn, the desire to have a purpose to do things, including myself, what drives me. And immediately I thought about what drives us as consumer. One of the thing that came to my mind while I was investigating more about the book was this company, Tom's. Do you remember the shoes? You
Yes.
know, and they got really hip for a while. Well, that company was a regular shoe company, but they have a purpose, and that purpose motivated the consumer. So it was really fascinating to me to now in the 21st century, we're using different techniques. And I love the Dan Pink says, you know, what science knows versus what business does in those two spaces.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just throw a lot of things to you, Paul.
Well, I think there are quite a few examples of companies. I think before we start recording, Mike mentioned Zappos as an example of a company that is supposedly very much guided by the principles that are talked about in this book. One thing that's interesting now, one of the videos I did see talked about like a high school teacher trying to teach an innovation class, and basically the video, well, I could find it for you, but essentially what the guy does is translate how you might make an innovation class much more interesting for high schoolers by applying some of the principles. And at least one of the things I remember from the video was talked about like, well, you're going to do my stuff for 4/5 of the time, but for 1/5 of the time, you could choose whatever you want to apply these principles to. And you know, I think it was more of a proposal about what you might do, but there are certainly some things where you could think, how could I translate this to, you know, my kids and their environment?
Yeah, and one last thing that I would say, it's I love how they said in order to get that drive, that you have to work on your sentence, right? He has it also in his website. Please check it out. It says, what's my sentence? So it's some sort of auto analysis, right? Like then you use your sentence to really come alive and to create motivation that lasts, but you also should be asking, was I better today than yesterday? And, you know, you can apply that in all walks of life too. So Very interesting.
And the sentence is where he talks about presidents, right, and how the great
Yeah.
presidents. There's a
Yeah.
sentence about Lincoln, for
Yeah.
example, about, and I can't
Like,
remember.
how you want people to remember you? What's your sentence? And it kind of connects it to the book from our last podcast, the seven, the book that we talk, where you also have to have a purpose. So I kind of make that connection between what's my sentence and what's my purpose, because that ultimately will be your drive to be successful and achieve the things that you want to achieve as an individual.
So Beth, what do you make of the intrinsic motivation? Is it, do you have a slightly different perspective about it?
Well, I'm struggling with it a bit because I feel like you have to start like on your, it's great if you can have a job which you feel like you have purpose in your work. But in order to get there and to get mastery, you sort of have to start with doing the menial part of learning the skills. And then you move on to these higher levels of, finding, through, and you get paid like a small amount of money as you're learning the process to be able to get to that higher level of, working with more, with only your first purpose is to provide for your family, and that's through money. Yep. And then you can move on to these higher levels of being able to be, to work on mastery of skills and then purpose in your job. So for me, I guess I'm more of a, I don't know, I don't see it in the same sense that he does of, I guess I do see the new economy is working this way. When I first saw like Wikipedia come out and I saw that they were like just having people contribute online to this big giant encyclopedia, I'm like, how is that ever going to work? So I was I didn't see how it was going to function. And now I see that it has. So I am trying to reach the level that David Pink thinks we should all be driven and motivated, but it's a longer road for me to actually experience it in my own life.
Interesting. I have a couple of things to say. Mike, what's your perspective on, because clearly you don't arrive like at a place with all of these things, because mastery takes time, for example.
Sure. I think, and I think he says even in the book that, intrinsic motivation is not, you're not born with it. It's something that you develop over time, right? So I think that, that is part of the book. And I think that in order to be able to have true intrinsic, motivation, this is where, Beth, I kind of agree with you, you need to, money needs to be off the table, right? So, you need to be, as an employer, you need to make sure that your people are making enough money so that they have and that they align with your culture and align with the purpose of what your company is about. So they're not worrying about where they're next, how am I going to pay for the mortgage? How am I going to pay for this? Or how am I going to pay for that? So part of going from extrinsic to intrinsic is that money's off the table. Now, where I think that, where I agree with you is that where if people haven't done a good job of planning and then they tend to, increase their lifestyle even as they get a higher paycheck and not, giving themselves that cushion, what winds up happening is that you're always externally motivated and you're unfulfilled, and which is what his point is, like, because you're always chasing that next dollar, because you have all these financial stresses. So, I do think some of it is very, and he talks about this too, like the old Henry Ford, being part of a machine process type of economy versus a more tech economy, and how, extrinsic focus was better for them versus intrinsic is for more the gig economy. So I think, just like everything else in life, I think it's, we can paint with broad brushstrokes across a whole host of different areas, draw some conclusions, but I do think that there are some key elements of this book that we can all incorporate, again, to kind of fit into our personal situations or the situations we surround ourselves in.
Yeah. couple of kind of builds on that actually, because I think there's I don't know whether the hierarchy of needs is still believed to be a valid model.
That's what I was thinking.
But there is
Yeah.
there's definitely something in the sense of, if you don't feel safe or you don't have enough food, or it's really hard to be self-actualized, which I guess is the top of the, and if I think about what, some of what he's talking about here, this is more in the kind of self-actualization space than it is in the food and shelter. I'm also kind of reminded, this is completely tangential and I'll come to you next, Kim, but if you know about the Hawthorne effect, if you've ever heard of this, this is probably close to 100 years ago. This guy called Hawthorne, believe it or not, did some studies about if lighting would help people who worked on production lines. And he made the place brighter, and the production improved. So they kind of drew a conclusion that, we just need more light and we can kind of, but he kind of went on to do some subsequent studies. And apparently when they dimmed the lights after turning them off, the production still kept improving. And they did some other studies to basically conclude why it's called the Hawthorne effect is that people would just actually liked being paid attention to. It really was nothing to do with the light or nothing to do with improving their circumstances. So I think it gave him a bit of purpose, but so Hawthorne effect. So Kim, intrinsic motivation. What do you make of it?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me to join the panel. And I am one of the panelists that did not read the book, but I did some background research on Daniel Pink and listened to a few hours of his speaking. And I guess I walk away with more questions. So I think the premise is interesting. I think the idea of honing in and cultivating intrinsic motivation is interesting and important. But some of the questions I walked away with piggyback on what the other panelists have mentioned. So for example, how do we define success? And I think there's a generational difference with that. So like Rosanna mentioned, success for some people might be getting the paycheck to get food on the table and pay bills to keep a roof over their family's head. And so, I think some of the assumptions that are embedded in this kind of book, assume that basic needs are met in order to get to this higher level of thinking about one's work and one's purpose and one's place in the world. The other thing I was thinking about that I tried to probe more and learn about was, how does context play into this? Because context is everything. So you could work in a place that purports to do this, but what if like racism and sexism are baked into the structures of the institution? So I don't know how you reconcile that. There's, a lot of dismantling that would have to be done around that. But I think it got me thinking about, and then how widely applicable is this? Thinking about some of the blowback that Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In got. Like, that's great if you're in that type of position where you have that power, but not every worker writ large has that kind of power. So I don't come from a business background. I come from a healthcare and higher education background. So I tend to think of more questions than I do and think about the background and who's got the power and who's affected by it. But I do think, in terms of everyday life and thinking about myself as, a worker and, provider, that there are important lessons to be learned.
Wow, there's a lot in there, Kim. So I do think there's well, let's kind of circle back around, but I do think there are some things in the book which definitely make assumptions about the kind of environment that you have created. But I think what it also says is if you are in a business environment, particularly business environment, because the interesting thing is our friend Mikhail says that more people are in flow in a work situation than they are in the kind of the outside of work, which I found quite fascinating. And I was interested to read more, but I only read that about 10 minutes before we started the call. So maybe another time. I do think what it says is that it's a way to also evaluate the kind of organization that you're with and who you're working with. So, you know, if people are spouting this and then they're behaving differently, then, you know, that's not a great sign. But you're right, not everyone will have the ability to simply walk away from that and find something else.
And Paul, since we're recording this podcast during a pandemic, it also, you know, when he wrote and when he was doing the TED Talks about this book, promoting this book, it was around 2008, I believe, through the recent economic crisis. And he was mentioning how, you know, we need to switch a little bit of our minds when it comes to what work in the 20th century and what needs to work to move and move forward during that economical crisis. And it's interesting because then I question myself, you know, the drive that we have now as parents, as many of us as business owners and as providers during the pandemic has changed. What drives us now, and as thinking more about like a company, if you're part of a company, of a team, what needs to change mentality wise to drive and to motivate everyone, you know, because everyone's motivations are completely different. And I think that this pandemic has also accelerate that shift of that. So I wanted to mention that.
Oh, Mike was going to say something, so I was pausing.
You know, yeah, I mean, you know, and I think, yeah, obviously as time change, you know, the lessons we learn about all these different books change, you know, just, you know, and I think everyone's right that, you know, the book is definitely geared towards how to build a better organization. But it's really for leadership in general, right? I mean, I think that, you know, how do you, you know, if you're the captain of the softball team, you know, how do you go about, you know, motivating, you know, your peers, you know, or how do you go about, if you're an educator, I mean, like, I think one of the examples in the book he talks about is like the Montessori school, right? And the Montessori style of teaching, which I think, quite frankly, Wilmington Friends incorporates some of it into, and why, you know, I think we're all Wilmington Friends families here, they know, you know, that, that educational experience where there is stuff that we need to learn, right? But here is this autonomous time that you can learn to explore what you want to learn, and so it creates learners amongst us, right? I mean, I know one of the examples I believe that was in the book was, you know, about the tinkering school in California, right, where there was these disadvantaged youths who didn't do well in school, but they got to go away to this camp. And in this camp, they got to play with all the things that were taboo at their houses: fire, you know, electricity, you know, and basically you got to sign a waiver as a parent. But these kids created the most amazing things. I think there's even a video online about how one kid created a roller coaster during his week, you know, at the tinkering school. So given the proper intrinsic motivations, you know, whether it's in education, whether it's in business, whether, you know, like I said, and, you know, full fair disclosure again, not doing a great job with the tweens and the teens. And when it comes to intrinsic motivation at home, you know, and I shouldn't say that because my kids are wonderful. So anyone who watches this, I have really good kids. You know, it's more of a joke. You know, there is, I think there are still even these in lessons to be learned. And the challenge will be for the virtual meetings and the virtual schooling is, how do we continue to have our children get intrinsically motivated? How do you create a time where they're sitting on a Zoom call from 9 to 2? Then how do we give them the time to explore the passions that they have for other types of learning? And I think that's the challenge that our educators have, and even our business leaders and just, our coaches and all those other things kind of going forward.
Can I add something to that? Because Mike, you bring up a good point that the challenge of it too, and those of you who are business owners can speak to this, is this type of evaluation and being more of a coach than an evaluator takes a great deal of time. And so having just completed my annual review and then thinking about my department chair who has a department of, say, 50 faculty, I'm wondering how that culture change could come about, because where does the time come from?
Yeah.
And so how do you all as business leaders reconcile that?
So I think it's interesting because if I think about my corporate experience, they were very much we've got a methodology for evaluating people, and it takes 3 months to go through this whole process. Seriously, it takes 3 months. And if I think about if you could apply that time that it takes to run this process of kind of aligning everybody's performance across the whole organization, I in that space, I actually think there's a big issue in terms of retraining people to do something different, but I don't actually see that you would need more time than you're already giving in a very large organization. And of course, I'd always argue the case that the coaching kind of improves performance as well. So it isn't like you're getting the same result for the same effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it always starts with the culture of the organization. And then when you have the right culture and then you build the right coaching out, I mean, the best companies don't have to do annual reviews. Employees know if they're doing a good job or not. They almost self-employee review, right? I mean, especially in the small business space, if I work for somebody and I know what I need to do, and I understand my job, and I have the ability to kind of do some of these autonomous things, but I'm not doing the things that I need to get done in a timely manner based upon whatever, I kind of know, right? So the best businesses have actually gone away from annual reviews. They do more coaching. They do more on-the-spot training. If someone someone makes a mistake, saying, "Hey, I really appreciate you, taking a shot at this, but here's how it should have been done," and then you correct and you move on, right? So there's more ongoing coaching, mentoring, teaching versus waiting to the end of the year and saying, "Okay, here's the 10 things you did right. Here's the 10 things you did wrong. Here's your pay for next year," right? So it kind of becomes, it's more of an ongoing, education. Whereas I think as Paul said, it took 3 months when he was back in his corporate world. I think, a lot of the best companies now have gone away from that environment, mostly. Now, big business is a whole different story, though.
Hallelujah.
Right. Yeah, we could do a whole episode on the rewards process, but yes, let's move on. And absolutely, I do think that I've seen that even with some larger organizations, they've kind of taking a different approach, but there's still something kind of around the language, I think, in kind of especially larger organizations, because to get to mastery, you have to make mistakes to kind of learn. And I think some organizations still have a really hard time, even if they spout the words of, it's okay to fail. They have a really hard time with failure because it's, so I'm not sure if we're digressing here. I'm going to circle back around one more time just to close it out. And this could be anything related to the book, but one takeaway, and I think maybe framing the question in terms of if someone hasn't come across Drive and you think they should read it, and I think we're suggesting that it's worth a read. What is the 1 or 2 things that you would take away? And because I could see you first, Rosanna, I'm going to start with you.
What's the takeaway?
Yeah, what's your takeaway that you'd share with someone who hasn't perhaps read the book yet?
Well, again, my perspective is always from the mom, raising kids, the hardest job on earth, the biggest investment that you have, the greatest company, if you can see like a family as a, like your institution. I'm eager to get this book and read it, because one of the things that I keep thinking that I want to be able to teach, right, to my kids and even to learn myself is the intrinsic motivation, the rewards, and the extrinsic motivation, like how can you manage that, those rewards? At what point do you incentivize by praise, or by I give you a little cupcake if you read a book, versus I want you to be eager to learn, like I want you to be able to, and I'm talking specifically with my kids, the desire to learn, so then you can, the motivation to learn, so then you can find a purpose, that will take you. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm gonna get the book.
Awesome. So you might be putting together the book about what really motivates teenagers then. Is that you might be?
Yeah, the family.
We'll come back to that. Maybe we'll write
Yeah.
it together.
The family in general, yeah.
So Mike, I really appreciate your insights. What's the one or two things you want to share with somebody who hasn't yet come across this book?
I mean, I think I've kind of touched on the ones I think that are really important, so I won't take up too much time. Just the process of learning about what motivates the people around you and how you can kind of help effectuate that motivation, and allowing the people around you to kind of explore their passions, and within whatever environment it is, whether it's a financial, a business, an education, or a family kind of situation. So it allows you to explore, and it helps allow you to help support other people.
Cool. So Beth, I can see you next. I don't know, it's going to show
Okay.
recording.
I think it just is a good reminder. The book itself is a good reminder to take the time to make sure that you are truly going after fulfilling your need to have a purpose, and you will be more successful. Try to not always concentrate on covering your basic needs, but take the time to realize that you need to be freed up, like that company, the people in that company was the
Atlassian.
Atlassian. Yes, exactly. In Australia, it's like take a day, take an hour once a week to free your mind up so you can be more creative, and it will actually benefit you in the long run.
Nice, thank you. So Kim, what's your one thing that might persuade you to read the book?
Yeah, I think building on what everyone said, the understanding the power of that wondering, the power of that time to pursue your own ideas, and the creativity that comes along with that, and understanding how to support that autonomy, mastery, and purpose across spaces.
Cool. Thank you. Everybody. I'm just, one of the things that I'll kind of add is apparently I only had the book on a virtual device. So obviously I was doing a lot of traveling when I originally read it. So I finally got a hard copy, and the latest version has some incredible coaching questions, trying to help people answer some of the questions I think that we've kind of been raising here. So I say these are the books that I think have influenced me greatly, and it was kind of nice to find that not only have I got the book now, I've also got kind of a bunch of associated questions when I get to the topic of what really motivates us. So thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you
for joining us this week. We will be back next week. Well, depends when you're watching these, I suppose, whether it's next week, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.